Congratulations on the book.
Man, yeah, I'm glad you enjoyed it.
I really did. I thought it was a fantastic journey. Obviously, talking about your history in Southern California. You know, I love the stories of Jan and Dean, but I also really have to comment the stories of the football and the volleyball and the surfing and the it really kind of brought the whole thing home. You know, it just added to the whole story. And I got to ask you, you're such a great collaborator. You know, did sports and that kind of team sport kind of background, is that kind of what lends you to being such a great collaborator?
Oh, I think exactly. You hit it right in the head. We met on a sports team, and we started singing actually in the locker room, the sports locker room. And mainly around the shower room had great old tile, so, the echo was absolutely the best echo that you could ever get. Never could quite get the same echo on
right.
tape, but had to kind of go back to the old shower room to get that echo.
Right.
But, when we first started getting interested in music, it was the doo-wop era, so a bunch of guys all hanging out in a sports locker room, and if you're going to be singing any of the songs of the day, they were all doo-wop. So, the more vocal parts, the better.
And of course, those early records are very doo-wop centric. They've got that sound and that kind of feel. Speaking about also the book, though, you cover all of this era, the early era, and then the rise. Looking back at it now, what prompted you to kind of put this book together? What made you decide, now is the right time to share these stories?
Oh, God. Well, actually, I started writing in, I think, like the mid-1990s, only because every time I was on an airplane, there was really nothing to do. So I'd take a notebook with me and just write down recollections. And I don't know if I was thinking specifically that it would be a book someday, but I just wanted to write just so I'd remember it
right.
10 or 15, 20 years later. And I'm lucky I did, because some of the stories I probably wouldn't have remembered.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I loved in the book when you talk about being in high school. You talk about the football team, and it's a very interesting thing that you talk about seeing Jan Berry in class, and your impression of him wasn't so positive. How did your relationship kind of develop? Was it through the high school football team and that singing in the showers? Is that kind of how it happened?
As a kid, I was probably jealous of the guy. He had everything. So, of course, I just thought he was stuck up, and I was sure that I would never get along with him. And then we just happened to get sports lockers right next to one another. I mean, literally right next to me, and
right.
I couldn't avoid him. And I remember thinking, first of all, I was shocked that he was going to try and be on a team, because I just thought he was too pretty, and I had seen him off campus smoking cigars,
right.
and I just thought, this guy can't be serious trying to make this football team. And of course, he was very serious, and he was a good athlete, and I couldn't help but to like the guy, because he was always bringing candy to practice. And I'd never even thought of eating candy and stuff. I mean, I was serious about being an athlete, and this guy would put his cigars away, and then he'd bring out some candy, and since I was the locker right next door, I would end up getting a good share of the candy.
Right.
And so he kind of bought my friendship, you would say, I guess.
You were singing and doing all of the kind of spontaneously singing, and then as the story goes, you meet up at a party and things kind of evolve into a singing group. At what point did it dawn on you, like, hey, this is this rock and roll thing or this doo-wop thing, if you will, that there was any kind of, something that's going to push you to actually make a record? Was that Jan's idea to, hey, let's make a record?
Oh God, yeah. It was Jan's idea. I don't even remember whether or not Jan shared kind of his vision. If he did, we probably, the rest of us weren't listening, because Jan had an IQ of about 177.
Wow.
So he was light years ahead of the rest of us, and most of the other guys were just happy to stand around a jukebox or a turntable and sing along with some song. But Jan he was the one that thought that there actually could be a chance for us to actually do something instead of just kind of having fun with it. But it was mostly all Jan, and it just slowly evolved. It wasn't one of those things that all of a sudden we decided to get serious about it. We were in it, most of us were in it just for the phone numbers of the chicks, because we knew the chicks all like musicians.
Right.
God, that Elvis, he had way too many girls.
Right. Later on it kind of turned into, Jan had some records released, and then you come back from the reserves and you start working with him, and you have your own shot at working, doing a recording. And that correct me if I'm wrong, but that recording, it kind of shot out of nowhere, and it kind of took off.
I know, and if you, obviously you're familiar with some of those early recordings. Man, when I hear those, they are just so primitive, and now I can kind of see how my parents might have listened to the recording and just go, well, son, that's very nice, but don't count on. It's the odds are certainly against you, so make sure you keep your day job
right.
and keep going to school. So I was as surprised as anybody that those records were hits.
It's incredible. You bring up a good point that you guys were full-time students at the same time, and obviously, looking back now, it's a little bit. You can look at the trajectory of the group, but at the time, you must not have been taking it so seriously that you would obviously quit school. Did you not think? You couldn't have imagined that there was a future in this.
No, not at all. And dig this: Jan was pre-med at UCLA.
Right.
Pre-med. That takes. You don't have any free time.
Right.
And let alone, we went out almost every other weekend and did concerts, and then of course we'd have to record, so you'd have to record at night, and at night is when the other pre-med students were all studying.
Right.
We were in the studio making records.
It's
pretty bizarre.
It's fascinating. When did you have time to pass classes? You know what I mean?
I don't know. I don't know how we did it, but we did. Possibly our professors gave us a little bit of a break, and then again, some professors were didn't really like the idea that we were spending so much time outside of the classroom. So it was probably a toss-up.
Right.
But somehow we did it. I don't know how.
I would imagine, once they saw you on a TV program or heard you on the radio, they're like, okay, let's give them a little bit of a break. But it's
well, not. Come to think of it, I think most of them really didn't appreciate rock and roll. Come to think of it,
yeah.
I think there was more that were kind of disgusted with it and wonder why anybody would want to create records for teenage girls.
Right. It being a new thing at that time, everybody just thought it was going to be a fad and it would be gone in a couple of years anyway, at that point,
Yeah, well, especially the doo-wop songs. The doo-wop things were really they were more targeted towards girls. I mean, girls were buying the records,
Right.
But as soon as we started making records about the car culture and/or surfing, then we brought in more guys.
Right.
I mean, even my friends in college early on would go, "Are you still making those records for girls?" And because they were listening to folk music
Sure.
and/or jazz, rock and roll was way beneath them. But soon thereafter, when the surfing and the cars and then the Beatles came along, that kind of changed the business dramatically.
Right, and it's interesting too because I didn't realize this till I read your book. But early on, Jan and you had met with Lou Adler and Herb Alpert, a very young Lou Adler and Herb Alpert, and a very well dressed Lou and Herb, and they kind of helped you, nurtured you along with these early singles. What was that relationship professionally like? Can you give us a little bit about how you guys worked together?
Well, it absolutely was another team, and it usually teams work very well. Even like Lennon and McCartney,
right.
You kind of always have. You should. Some people can work outside of a team, but most people work better in a team. Herb Alpert was an accomplished musician. Jan was learning, and then Lou Adler kind of had the vision, and it was Lou that understood branding and marketing,
right.
and packaging and all that kind of stuff. And we were just busy thinking about songs and how to put them, on a tape to make them sound good, and hopefully they would be commercial. So we're just focused on the music, and Lou was looking at the big picture, and Herb was helping us develop musically.
It's incredible.
And obviously they went on to be super successful, so we were very, very lucky to have them be part of the team.
Right, I mean, especially very early on. I mean, and it wasn't too much longer that, the musical scene started to kind of evolve and change. And obviously in the book you talk about being around, you've had some success with some of the singles like Baby Talk, and they're out, and you're doing some TV, and you're getting on these radio programs, and then one day you hear a track called "SURFIN" by this young group called the Beach Boys, and you're like, who are these guys? And obviously that started to evolve, and then you'd eventually to play with them and meet them. Tell me a little bit about your first impressions of meeting the Beach Boys as young kids, playing a show together and eventually recording with them.
Well, early on, when we recorded it up at Jan's house, just working on as a garage band, even before we had records, we always had, at the end of the football season, we didn't have the locker rooms any longer available to us. So we started meeting up at Jan's house, and we were a vocal group, and there were probably averaged at least six to seven guys anytime we all got together.
Right.
So we were used to singing in a group, and somehow it just kept breaking down, and our records came out as we were a duo, Jan and Dean, just two guys. We never really meant to be two guys. We would have preferred to have been that vocal group, like that Dion and the Belmont.
Right.
That's what we wanted to be. And we just couldn't hold a group together. Everybody got different interests and headed off in different directions. And now all of a sudden we meet the Beach Boys, and they were all self-contained. They played all their own instruments, and they were vocalists. They loved writing harmony parts and figuring out, vocal techniques and all that kind of stuff. And we went, holy cow, here we are. We're, if we hang with these guys, were back in a vocal group, because
Right.
they would be our background musicians when we played live, and we loved it.
Right. It's
Felt comfortable.
It's such a harmonious kind of sharing of ideas. Obviously, some of the tracks that Brian had written, he'd worked with you guys to get those out, and there was a camaraderie, I guess, between the groups, and a working relationship between Jan and Brian. Do you remember if there was any kind of swapping of influences? Like, did Jan influence Brian in certain ways as far as, production work or whatnot, and vice versa?
Well, when we first heard "SURFIN," and you mentioned that was a doo-wop song,
Right.
and it sounded exactly like the stuff we were doing, and we weren't intimidated by it or anything. I think we kind of felt honored that somebody actually liked our stuff enough to imitate it. So when we did finally all get together, it was almost immediate that we got along.
Right.
They knew about what we were doing. So when we did finally get in a recording studio together, Brian was not used to being in really good studios in the early 60s. And then when he gave us a half-finished Surf City song that he was not going to finish because he had lost interest in it and moved on to working on Surfin' USA.
Right.
So he gave us this half-finished Surf City song. We went ahead and finished the lyrics and put it together and arranged it, and then actually cut the track to it. I'm sure we invited him, but for some reason he didn't show up. Then when we had the tracks all finished, we were ready to do the vocals. We called him again and just said, by the way, we finished that Surf City song you gave us, and if you'd like to, come to the studio and, feel free to, you can sing along, and we can create the thing together. So he showed up at the studio, and of course Jan showed him all the recording techniques that
Right.
Brian didn't know about. And Brian was blown away by the track. He went, where'd you get the track from? We said, Brian, there are guys that are called studio musicians that come in and record stuff for you. They all read music, and you write music. You could just write down all the charts, and you set them in front of these guys, and they'll play it, and they'll do it in 2 takes.
Wow.
And up until that time, he would wait for his band to get off the road, and then by the time they would get off the road, they were tired, so they'd need a couple of days to rest up. And then they would have to come in the studio and learn, these songs. And we pointed out to Brian, you could have all these tracks cut by the time your guys get off the road, and all you have to do is do your wonderful vocals, because that's what your band is really kind of known for, is those vocal parts.
Right.
So why waste a bunch of time playing a guitar or a bass or drums when you don't have to, and you can pay these guys $200 and they'll cut you 2 or 3 tracks.
What's crazy is, as some of these guys that were on the Jan and Dean records, of course, went on to go and play on a lot of these Beach Boys records, and now are known as the Wrecking Crew. But you've got a lot of these. I mean, just Plaz Johnson and Hal Blaine and these types of musicians who are now, they've been on countless amounts of records. But this was in the dawning of that period for those musicians in L.A. and it was such an exciting time. And one of the stories that I was really captivated by was the story that you told about the Beach Boys recording the Party record. And you guys were in the studio, I guess a studio next to them, and you went over and just happened to kick off an idea, which turned out to be Barbara Ann. Can you tell us a little bit about that story? Because that actually just blew my mind. When I heard that, I was like, oh, wow, I had no idea.
That's strange.
It's crazy.
I'll try and shorten the story a little bit. Brian Wilson, at this particular time, was working on Pet Sounds. And, of course, Pet Sounds was nothing like what he had recorded before.
Right.
So the record company was wondering, what's taking you so long? I mean, you never really spent that much time on Little Deuce Coupe.
Right.
You know, they were looking for that kind of a song. And they had no idea. I don't think they even had any ideas working on stuff like Good Vibrations, you know, very complicated songs, and God Only Knows, and those kinds of songs take a lot more time than those songs that the record company were used to. So they kept pestering him, where's the record? Where's the record? And it's coming. And he finally decided that that he wasn't really that close to finishing, and they had been bugging him so much, he thought, well, I have this other idea of doing a party record that could be cut in one night in a party atmosphere, and we could do it again one night. We could mix it and put it together in a couple of days, then I can hand it to the record company and get them off my back for a couple of months. That's the only reason he decided to do this project then and there. So, of course, we were invited. His idea was to have friends and neighbors and all sorts of people come to this party. And he, of course, wanted to feature us because, you know, they're musical buddies. And we ran it by our record company because now we were actually going to, you know, our likenesses might be on their record album cover, and of course would be mentioned and stuff. So our record company said, the only way we will let you do that, because we were on separate labels, is that if you get a signed agreement from the Beach Boys that they will be on your next project. Oh. We said, look, we don't sign stuff, you know, it's all verbal agreements, you know, and Brian's already, you know, created Surf City and 3 or 4 of our other major hits. He's already been on them, and he didn't ask for any credit or anything. Right. You know, so what's the difference? And they said, unless you get that contract, we don't give you permission to do it. So we just happened. So unfortunately, we had to tell Brian we couldn't do it, and then we just happened to be in the studio, and we were we were in the big studio, and they were in a little bit smaller studio, but we were almost right across the hall from one another, and they knew that we couldn't participate or weren't supposed to. And somehow there was a lull in our recording. We had to fix something. So I said, I'm going to go take a break. I'm going to walk over to the Beach Boys studio. And Jan said, okay, but remember, don't sing. And I said, don't worry. I was in that, I maybe walked in, and about 2 minutes later I was singing. So obviously I didn't take direction very well. Right. But I knew I had about 15 minutes, and then I had to be back in my studio. So, of course, the guys said, what do you want to sing? And I said, you know, anything that we don't have to rehearse more than once, right? If that, because I only have about 10 or 15 minutes, I have to be back. And they kind of knew my situation. They said, well, you'll be our secret singer. I said, okay, fine. We don't, you know, nobody's to know. And they said, oh, don't worry. So I suggest Barbara Ann, because Jan and I had done it a couple of years before, and just put it on a album. And I thought, Barbara Ann, everybody knows Barbara Ann. So I said, Barbara Ann, let's do that. So we started like at least twice before we actually did a full take. And we kept tweaking I don't know, I think we changed the key once, and we changed some vocal parts around. I was singing background parts with the other guys, and then Brian was singing the falsetto lead. After the second take we did, Brian said for me to sing with him, and then the other guys said, no, he's over here with us singing the background parts. I didn't care which. I was having fun no matter what.
Right.
I'm looking at my watch, going, but we need to finish something because I got to get out of here. So Brian won because Brian was the producer. So I went over to his microphone, and we sang one take all the way through, and then it stopped, and then it was so much fun. We started it again, and then we stopped, and then we said one more time and did it. Just kept doing the ending over and over again because it was so much fun.
Right.
And finally, we ended it on kind of a blues ending, which was kind of goofy. And then I go, okay, are we done? And they said, yeah. And I'm walking out, and this music's still kind of going a little bit, and somebody says, thank you, Dean. Well, I think, the recording's over.
Right.
Dang. They had that recorder going, and on the actual record, at least the version that's on the LP,
right,
you can hear the thank you, Dean. I went back in the studio. I told Jan I didn't sing. I just listened, and he was okay with that.
That's
that ended up, and I guess you're pointing out that ended up being either their top-selling single, or at least it was their second top-selling single of all time.
Right. I mean, it's incredible.
Less than 15 minutes.
Wow. It's incredible too. I mean, you're on that track, so I mean, you must, when you hear that, part of you must be transformed back into that studio and just going in there and knocking it out real quick. I mean, it's incredible story, and
it actually wasn't until the repackage. I mean, I kind of got used to hearing the single version, which
Sure.
is not as long. It doesn't have the false starts and all of that.
Right.
The single version is still fun to hear, but I'd always liked the longer version with all the takes. And they just put out, of course, the 50-year anniversary of the Party album with all of the chitter-chatter and all of the kind of fun stuff that you'd normally have to leave out. And I had not remembered what it really sounded like to kind of do all those false takes and start over and all that stuff. And that was really, really fun. I'll have to admit, I absolutely loved it.
Yeah, I mean, it's great to have all of those sessions now out, so you can kind of revisit all of that and just see exactly what it was like.
You can hear the progression. Yeah, and on all the songs. I mean, it wasn't only the Barbara Ann song, but you could hear them working and tweaking some of the other songs that were on that record, too, as well.
Right.
It's all good, fun stuff.
It really is. That time is such a special time because, I mean, you guys were deep in school. You're also having this, career that is just budding and getting kind of, bigger as time was going on. Were you guys thinking, well, when we graduate, this rock and roll thing is going to be kind of over? I mean, what did you guys talk about that? I mean, did you think that, well, this band is going to have to dissolve or break up? Was that ever a consideration at that time?
Kind of. I mean, we were approaching, if Jan did finish, I mean, he finished pre-med at UCLA, graduated, and then went into actual med school. At a certain point in med school, you have to do internships and stuff. So at that point, what do you do?
Right.
We kind of discussed it, but then we just thought, we'll just keep going and just see where this takes us. We had a television pilot that we had done that was going to debut the same season that the Monkees were going to debut.
Right.
So we would have been on competing networks, but we had some of the same musical friends. We probably would have, participated on their show, and they would have participated on our show. So that would have been another friendly rivalry.
Right.
And we had no idea where this television thing was going to go, and who knew?
Right.
So there were some very heavy-duty decisions we were going to have to make pretty soon. But then, as you know, Jan had a horrendous car accident,
right,
and sustained a lot of head trauma and brain damage.
And how did you adjust after that? Obviously, you later went into doing the design work and things that you'd obviously gone to college for, but I mean, immediately you must have been, there's obviously a big transition for you, having to be like, well, this career that I've had up until this point is now, dissolved right in front of my face. How did you process that year before you started doing the design work and making that decision to go in that journey, on that path?
I probably was kind of in shock.
Yeah.
But I didn't really have a whole lot of time to think about it. Still, I was used to going to school 5 days a week.
Sure.
So at least 5 days a week, my everything was kind of normal. I just wasn't recording at night, and then I wasn't going out every other weekend or so. So obviously that was different. I don't know. We had gone to school because we were covering our bets, and I did study advertising design and packaging and branding and all that kind of stuff at USC.
Right.
And so I figured, I guess this is what we planned for, and here it is. So I still had a lot of friends in the industry.
Sure. So
I thought my graphic design work and branding and all that will have to do with the music industry. So at the very least, I'll still be connected to the industry.
Did you consider doing records without Jan? Did you consider, like, maybe I could do some solo releases and forge a path, doing solo work? Was that ever a consideration for you?
None. No. It was just so magical. And we had 7 really magical years.
Right.
And I just thought, there's no way you can replicate that. And I didn't want to be a single artist. I like being in a vocal group.
Yes.
I did work with the Beach Boys a few times, and there was some talk that, maybe I would end up being with them. But I got busy in the graphics business,
right,
and I really enjoyed it, and I was pretty successful at it. So that kept me busy until I could see whether or not Jan could get well enough to where, and healthy enough where he could maybe do some music.
Right.
But it wasn't very likely.
And it's talking about the Kittyhawk, it's amazing because this is in an era where record packaging became, there's inserts and there's cutouts and there's these kinds of things, and you were at the forefront of that, giving the artists kind of control, taking it away from, say, the labels. And did that kind of organically just come because you were a musician yourself?
Well, I guess I had realized that and it was organic. But I had realized that artists should have a hell of a lot more input into their packaging and branding. I mean, you're branding your own kind of your own career, for God's sake.
Right.
And, that's very important. I think the Beatles had a lot to do with it because they got all of that. They were the whole package. I mean, they were writing their own stuff, co-producing their own stuff. It was obvious that they were thinking about even their photography, and so their packaging, along with the written word, they would write their own liner notes. They were totally involved in presenting their brand, and you can't have outside people meddling with your brand if they don't know anything about it.
Right.
So it became easier for me to explain to other recording artists that, look what the Beatles are doing, and we could do the same. I could be your liaison between you and the company and the art department, and we can work together on this. But, it should come from the artist. The artist is the one that's gambling that stuff will work.
Right.
And if it doesn't work, the company just moves on to the next one. So, yeah, it was right in the forefront of all that gatefold stuff with the album covers that would open up, and we were die cutting things.
Sure.
We were using really, really super paper to print stuff on, and really paying attention to the whole package. I mean, even when I got nominated for a Grammy, I got nominated for a record cover of the year.
Right.
And then once I ended up on the committee, because I did win a Grammy for album cover of the year, it was I was the one that said it shouldn't be record cover. And you used the word packaging. This is so much more than just that 12 by 12 front piece.
Right.
It's got a back. It's got even a spine. I used to put messages on the spine where the most of the legal stuff was put.
Right.
And then now they can open up. You can have inserts. You have dust covers, the white covers that would just cover the record. I remember looking at those going, they're blank. It costs like a fourth of a cent to print something on there. More of your story, more of what you're about. That's what the fan wants. So I changed it to packaging. I think from that point on, probably in the mid '70s, it was record packaging instead of just album covers.
Album covers. Is there one piece in particular that gave you a bit of satisfaction over the other ones, or a one that was such a struggle that it was a relief to get it out?
They all were kind of reliefs because we did put a lot of thought into them, and then of course we would have resistance from some of the record companies. Some got it right away, and then some you had to really push. Oh man, Nitty Gritty Dirt Band.
You're right.
Those covers were all very, very special, and the art department absolutely hated the fact that we would pretty much do all of those packages outside of the system. And we always did extremely well with them and won lots of awards. And the Dirt Band always looked good, looked like they were successful, and they did end up being very successful. And I think that, although the Steve Martin stuff was fun too.
Of course.
And all the Beach Boys stuff.
Right.
The Beach Boys stuff, I mean, I just worked with them 2 nights ago, Saturday night. And they have a rear projection, a big, beautiful screen and back to the stage, and all these visuals going on. And I saw half of my album covers up there, plus their logo. I designed their logo in the mid '70s, and they've used it ever since.
Wow! Yeah.
Every year I design their next tour, because they use the theme is usually a 50-year anniversary of something, and they were so prolific.
Right.
That we've done 50-year anniversary. Well, first just of the group, and then Surfin' USA, and then Fun, and I Get Around, and California Girls. Each summer tour, or actually a whole year's tour, is based around the 50-year anniversary. And this year it was Good Vibrations.
Right.
So I designed all the components for all the pieces for their Good Vibrations tour.
And it's amazing too, because that logo is still, I mean, it's iconic at this point. I mean, they've been using it for 40 some odd years now at this point, and it's, as you mentioned it in the book, it's a very key, important image that you always associate with the group. And it's for those who are going to pick up the book and read it. It's like I was saying, it's it's the Jan and Dean story, but it's all of these other things. When you get into that element of it, it kind of elevates the whole story and gives you even more depth. I would say, to the story, and around
a lot of components, right?
It really is, and it's fascinating. And when you talk about the this era of your life, I mean, you were you're cranking them out and working a lot with a lot of bands. And then, lo and behold, Jan kind of is strong enough to get on the stage, and you guys are able to reunite. Did you ever think that was ever going to happen?
No, I didn't count on that at all. But we were very, very fortunate to I did with a I worked with a writer who wanted to write the Jan and Dean story, and this was in the mid-'70s, and I said, we haven't made a recording at that time in 15 years or something, but he was still going to write the story, so go ahead. He was a lawyer, and he had a real job, so it wasn't as though he was going to waste a bunch of time. And he wrote the Jan and Dean story and then shopped it around, and none of his contacts wanted it. They kept thinking, who's going to be interested in these guys? And then I finally suggested, well, why don't you send it to Rolling Stone? And he did. They loved it. They had him tweak it some, and I helped him tweak it some, because being in Rolling Stone, it had to be a little bit more musical than just this plain old story. And then it came out, and it got a lot of recognition. And then based on that, some Hollywood folks started looking at it and thought it'd make a great movie. And it came close to being made as a theatrical movie, but it just got complicated. And then it ended up somebody seeing it that did television movies for TV. And you only had three networks, so if you get anything on a network show, you were going to have 20 million people or 30 million. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't like today where there's 200 stations to look at. So you were guaranteed like 15 million to 20 million was kind of an average show, and then if it was a hit, you could have 30 to 40 million. So luckily for us, it got made. It got made pretty well. I kind of wrote most of the Jan and Dean stuff, and then all the stuff about Jan's recovery was done by somebody else who interviewed all of his therapists and doctors and stuff.
Right.
So anyway, it was pretty good for television. It was a pretty good movie. 34 million people saw it in prime time on a Friday night. And then it aired another 9 months, 10 months later, and got even bigger numbers.
I mean, it's incredible.
Man, it was Mike Love who I got him a part, and Bruce Johnson got them parts in the movie. Actually, I asked all the guys, and Mike and Bruce were the only ones that wanted to do it. And it was Mike that felt all the exposure from this film, and he was calling me at my graphics studio going, man, you need to rethink this, and you should see if Jan could be well enough to come out here and do this, because there's a whole bunch of people now asking about you.
Wow.
So based on that, I thought, since we didn't have to start from square one, and as a matter of fact, Mike invited us to go on a tour, and they had their own jet to fly on.
Right.
So I went right from a recording, from a graphics studio to, and I'd never taken much more than a weekend off to do something, because I was really stuck at my graphic design studio, kind of a one-man band. And then Mike's offering to fly me around in a private jet.
How could you say no?
So I couldn't say no. I said, "Oh, okay, we'll give it a go." So we were invited to hang with them. They would play, be our backup band. Well, we would come out during their set, and they would play our, 3 major hits, and then come out for the encore, and that would be it. And it was just absolutely awesome, and it worked well enough. The audiences all seemed to like it, and I made the decision that flying around in a private jet was kind of fun.
Right.
Why not?
Of course. And
it went on for another 25 years.
Right. You guys stuck together. Obviously, you had a little highs and lows in the 80s. And there was a brief period. In the book, you talk about doing a quick tour with Mike Love. And you've brought up Mike a few times. Can you give us a little bit of idea of your friendship with Mike? Because he's obviously been with the Beach Boys since they started. He's Brian and Dennis's cousin. And you seem to have such a great bond with him. What is it about Mike Love that you guys get along so well?
Well, we're Pisces.
Is that right?
And Pisces are kind of different. He has a good sense of humor. He loves writing or co-writing, and he and Brian really co-wrote some really, really great songs.
Of course.
Mike also understood the branding. It was Mike that brought me aboard to do Beach Boy covers and let me develop the logo. Actually, I didn't know I was developing a logo. I was just developing some type that we might use for a while. That was 50 years ago.
Right.
But he enjoyed all the same things I enjoyed. I also was very close to Dennis Wilson. And Dennis and Mike, didn't get along.
Right.
But I was about the only one that could hang with both of them. Dennis and I we were action buddies, and we would go to the drag strip together, and we got go-karts, and we go sailing on his boat and stuff like that, and surfing. And but Mike and I just got along. We had a lot of social things we did together too as well. So I don't know. It just always clicked. We always saw everything kind of the same way. So it just always worked.
We're running a little short on time, and I wanted to make sure I touch up on this. Is that
your show?
And I'm happy that you are here, by the way, sharing all of these stories, because it is exceptional. But I want to talk about, you're still playing today, and you are doing you have a group, and I wanted to ask you about the group, the Surf City All Stars. You guys play all over the place, and I know sometimes David Marks from the Beach Boys is sometimes in the group, and there's other guys that you've been playing with for years. Could you tell us a little bit about how you put this group together, and what your any shows and things that you've got planned for the future?
Well, it basically was the same Jan and Dean band. I think there's only one guy in the group that wasn't around when Jan was around.
Right.
Jan passed away in 2004, so it's been about 12 years.
Right.
So it's basically the same Jan and Dean backup band, except for one guy. So we are just the Jan and Dean group with minus Jan, doing, keeping the same, pretty much the same set list that we did with, we changed it some. So it's just an extension of the Jan and Dean career, more or less.
Right.
And people still seem to enjoy the music, so why not? And we have the same buyers that bought both Jan and Dean now, will buy me with the, we call them the Surf City All-Star Band.
Right.
But it's basically the same group, so they know the music backwards and forwards. We got another team, me in teams, So we are a really good team. We all get along. We all like one another, and it's been a absolutely great ride. From time to time, when the budget can afford it, Al Jardine's played with us,
Right.
And you mentioned David Marks, and actually Mike has played with us a few times too as well. So it's just kind of an ensemble.
Would you have ever have thought, 50 years, now the stuff that you were doing when you were, barely in your 20s is still it's become such a it's such an iconic American sound. It's kind of it's amazing to me to think about some of the tracks that you were a part of. I mean, also bringing skateboarding and surfing to a large population. I mean, the sound of Jan and Dean really kind of kick-started that, and I don't know if you get all of that credit, but it's an interesting life that you've been a part of, and I don't know. I mean, getting to reflect on that. I don't know if you ever get to take that time to do that and think about it, but it's amazing. It's an amazing body of work that you've been a part of. I'm so thankful for you to come on the program and share all these stories. I could go on for another 2 hours.
Well, you're welcome to call me anytime, Eddie.
I appreciate it, Dean.
You got my number. I'm just sitting here enjoying emails.
Yeah. Well, you know what? We'd love to do that, again, and have you on. I want to let our fans and our followers know that they can pick up your book, Surf City. It's available through Target, Barnes & Noble, and Amazon.com. And, of course, I recommend it to everybody because it's a wonderful, wonderful book, and it's a wonderful visuals on that beautiful era of Southern California back in the early 60s. I love it. And Dean, I want to thank you again so much for being on the program this morning.
Eddie, it was absolutely my pleasure. As I said, anytime somebody doesn't show up for you or something, I'm here.
Hey, well, you know what? I would love that. We could go into chapter 5 on the book.
Oh man, that would be fun.
I love it. Well, thank you so much, Dean, and have a great one. And we'll talk to you soon.
I look forward to it.
You got it. Take
Bye,
care.
Eddie.
Bye-bye. There he is. Dean Torrence of Jan and Dean.